Hey everybody, Brian Martin from Lafayette School Corporation is with me on the stage here to teach us a little bit about scaling for the mere mortal.
Well, hi everyone, welcome to Scaling for the Mere Mortal. I don't know if you're like me, I'm not somebody who likes to take notes. I never really have been, so I figured, I'd put my slides up there, and one of the things I'm going to cover is a little exercise on how you might be able to make a model of a cluster up there. Those QR codes, I'll provide you both. As my title up there says, I'm the Apple Systems Admin for Lafayette School Corporation. I've been in my position since 2002. We got about 6,000 iPads or so under management and a much smaller population of Macs. Today on the agenda, I really just kind of want to cover a very brief introduction of the timeline of a really good story that happened at LSC a couple of years ago. We had a major disaster with regard to our standardized testing, and the whole theme of that is how I was able to rise from a really bad situation. I'm going to cover a really good Jamf training course recommendation. That's what provided me the skills to rise from the disaster. Might define some basic clustering terms for those who've never done this or dealt with this before. If you're like me, when 2 or 3 years ago I had just set up a single server, I couldn't tell you what split DNS was or any fancy terms like that. I might cover one of the terms that's going to be horizontal scaling, but I want to show you some of the various options you can do with it. Cover the whiteboard diagram that helped me build the cluster that we've got, and then the model using VMware that goes with it. Some of the challenges we ran into, migration to the cluster from our previous single server, some security concerns that your IS team might have, and afterwards take your Q&A and maybe offer some other advice. So the timeline, I'm going to truncate a lot of that because 2002 is quite a long time. Anyway, so in 2011 we added our first iPads in the district, and before that we were managing a little under 200 Macs. I was mainly just using a collection of scripts and deploy studio and whatnot. I only ran a single Mac server that had workgroup manager and whatnot on it. But in 2011, we got our first iPads, and we realized once we had about 100 of them, it's probably time to get a mature management product such as Jamf Pro. We put it on a fairly beefy Mac Mini in 2012, and well then our IT guy says that VMware's all the rage in 2013, and he asked if I could get off the Mac Mini and put it on a VM. I really didn't give a whole lot of thought to scaling even when we migrated to the VM. So I just kind of ported the same hardware settings I had on the Mac Mini to the VM. But things weren't crashing or things weren't burning. I mean, everything that I tried to throw at it seemed to work. Jamf kept adding new features like DEP, VPP, to the JSS. They added Cisco ISE integration. They added, you name it, I think they've given it to us to work with. Well, then in 2015, when we had enough of our students that had one-to-one devices, we wanted to start doing standardized testing district-wide on the one-to-one devices. You see kind of where I'm setting myself up for. So once we started the standardized testing, we were presented with this situation. So yeah, nothing like, remember I just told you I really hadn't given a lot of thought to scaling. So going into testing, I didn't know that was the situation. I was fairly confident that it would all hold. Yeah, nothing like me having all the teachers Casper focus their iPads in at 9 a.m. on a Thursday, only to watch my JSS crash and burn, and because I was using Cisco ICE to authenticate people to the Wi-Fi with as a supplicant, yeah, I also watched them get kicked off the Wi-Fi. This is in the middle of standardized testing where teachers' pay is dependent on whether their students make the grade on the tests or not. And yeah, needless to say, I had a superintendent and a CTO that were kind of wondering what's going on here, and they were like seriously telling me, what do you need to do to fix this? Little nerve-wracking. I don't like being in that situation. I'm going to get into a little bit here in a minute what I did do to fix it and what I did long-term to fix it. But first off, I said I'd talk about a training class recommendation. So the class that helped me get through that is the Jamf Certified Server Admin class. Nowadays we're calling it Jamf 350. It used to be known as the CJA, if you've seen anyone wearing the black jackets around here. If you show up to this class, I'd make sure that you are fairly familiar and well-versed with dealing with all facets of the JSS. It's the ongoing joke in that class. It's the only one with no prerequisites, but in reality, if you show up for CJA class and you don't know what you're doing in the Jamf Pro app, you're probably going to run into a few troubles. Okay, we'll start with some basic concepts. So if I were going to scale my server, I got two options. I could either grow the server bigger or add more servers. If I'm going to grow it bigger, I'd like to call that vertical scaling. It's basically just a fancy word for adding more stuff to your existing server. You know, maybe I need to add some more RAM to the old Mac Classic there. Or perhaps a better motherboard or hard drive. And yeah, lots of things would be needed to get that one up to snuff. Okay, so then there's horizontal scaling. That's where I add additional Tomcat servers, point them at the database, and you know, have them work together in some logical manner. I like to put that in quote marks to help serve the clients. I'm going to need a load balancer. That's the server that's going to decide, hey, your connection's going to go to server 1, your connection's going to go to server 2, 3, whatever, however many you have. And split DNS, that's just a fancy word for, okay, so my JSS URL is going to be registered to one IP on campus and a different IP off the campus. So okay, we go back to my crash. That crash was pretty bad. So the short answer of how I got through it was I didn't have the knowledge or know-how at that point to do a horizontally scaled situation or a cluster. What I did was I called Jamf and I said, help dig me out of this, please. And true to Jamf's form, they dug me out of it. That being said, it was less than ideal. I had to have people stagger when they went in for the test, and we were just really hoping and praying the server didn't go down. But again, we dug out of it, and long term I decided this is never happening again. So I took an analysis of our server hardware, and I realized one of the problems we had is I could sit there and add 10 or 12 processors to the single VM, but Tomcat really wasn't using them. So I had our VMware administrators take a look at the resources during that period of time, and we basically overwhelmed one processor, and we're using a little bit of the second one, but it really wasn't using those 10 processors at all. And we had 32 gigs of RAM, so it wasn't starved for that, and I had plenty of storage in it. I checked that. Our network guys, I can't really blame them. You know, I got rock solid fiber connection between the servers and the buildings. I've got a gig pipe from the data center to the buildings, and we got fairly decent Wi-Fi. It was tested and supported up to 35 devices per room. So yeah, it was taking this into account that made me realize it's probably time to cluster the server even if I don't know how. So after I sat through CJA class, I don't expect anybody to be able to read my chicken scratches here, but this is the actual whiteboard diagram of what I came up with. It's important you start there, so that way, if nothing else, when you're bringing your admins into things, you can show them, hey, this goes over this port, or hey, your clients are going to connect here, or outside the firewall, they're going to connect there, or whatnot. I've got some cleaner drawings that we're going to look at here. So, okay, horizontal scaling, or clustering, or whatever we're going to call it. The most simple implementation of that would be separating your Tomcat server from your MySQL database. Maybe you just have 2 servers in your district and you put one of them. You don't even really have to declare a DNS. I just did there because it looks pretty for a diagram here, but you can have your MySQL server hosted on just an IP address and have your JSS URL on the Tomcat server. So long as you got an open connection on port 3306, you're good. This is assuming all internal. Well, then you might want to get a little bit more complex than that. So I don't know about you, but I want to be able to service my clients both on or off the campus. So there are a lot of ways to do that. The way that Lafayette School Corporation does it is a little bit differently than what I've got diagrammed here. This is actually Jamf's recommendation on doing it. They would have you put a Tomcat instance out in the DMZ that has the ability to see inside to the MySQL server on port 3306. So in reality for this, the only thing I've added is one Tomcat server outside, and I had to allow traffic from the server outside to the MySQL server, and I had to pull a little bit of split DNS like we talked about earlier. I really don't want to have to talk about a distribution point, but if you're managing Macs off the campus and you don't really think about a distribution point, well, your policies are probably going to fail. So I took a look at what's currently supported. Right now there's 3 vendors that Jamf is currently supporting. You got Amazon, Rackspace, and Akamai, but one of the things I'm trying is, because we're a school district and Microsoft's giving us Azure fairly freely, I wanted to try to find some way to make Azure work, and sure enough, all it is just an SMB connection, or if you do WebDAV, HTTPS. Or you could go the traditional route and put some kind of Windows server or Linux server or whatnot out in the DMZ. I don't know about you, but I don't really feel like securing that. It was a lot better to kind of hand that over to Microsoft. That's why I didn't go about trying to do that. I'm not going to go into distribution points a lot more, simply because I think everybody at this conference has their own unique way of handling the distribution points. Here's a more complicated construction. So, okay. I want to do just a small cluster here. So I've got 3 servers there inside the inside the DMZ that respond to clients. They're all pointed to the server, and the load balancer basically tells the client, okay, you're going to go to TC203. Hey, you're going to go to TC201. Load balancer, like I read the definition of it. You can go in and program all kinds of logic in your load balancer to decide whether traffic's going to go to one server or the other. Some load balancers will have, they'll recognize that they have lesser hardware on some of the back ends, and you can split the traffic 60-40, 70-30, whatnot. In our case, we just do it round robin. I mean, we're just doing 3 VMs that have pretty much identical settings, but we go in and we tell the load balancer, hey, if a client initiates a connection to one of them, that it gets to finish the entire connection until the session's over at the very least. Kind of almost looks like the same slide, but it's not. This particular one, so one of the things that I was really vexed with when we had the testing failure is it was so bad I couldn't even get into the MySQL database to restart it, or just getting into the servers was impossible. I wanted, after that disaster, some means of connecting to a server that my clients aren't going to hit, if nothing else, to kill it and respawn processes. So with this one, with this particular construct, you'll notice that the clients and the load balancer are only connecting to the first two, and I left that one, the adm.urorg.org, I left that one out, not behind the balancer, so in a really bad and horrible situation, I could just take my MacBook, connect to it, and say, hey, stop this. This is pretty much the same construct as the other slide, only one of the things my session advertised was what to do if you're running Cisco ICE in your organization. So looking back at what happened in that testing situation, I realized what part of what was choking my server was about 1/3 of the processes were responding to Cisco ICE queries that devices were made. I mean, Cisco ICE is a product that will allow you to check your JSS to see if a device is authorized before it'll let you hop on the Wi-Fi. My JSS was spending 1/3 of its time responding to those queries, let alone doing anything we asked it to do. So you could use that same admin config that was on the last slide and do just that, have one server dedicated to nothing but responding to Cisco ICE queries. The way I did that is, so when you're following the Jamf Nation article on how to set up Cisco ICE, it's very simple. You're going to generate a URL that they'll have you do. It's there in the picture on that slide. But no one says that's the URL you got to feed to Cisco ICE. You could have it go to one of your nodes instead of to the whole JSS behind the load balancer. So that way I've got one dedicated Tomcat instance doing nothing else but responding to Cisco ICE queries. Well, by that point I kind of want to see it in action. I don't want to just sit and whiteboard things all day. So get myself a nice beefy MacBook and put a copy of Parallels or Fusion on it. Probably need to have access to your JSS installers and really good text editor. One thing I can say after trying to build a cluster, and you'll learn this in CJA class, they'll teach you how to build a cluster on both Windows and Linux. I found that if you're going to try to do it all on one laptop, that it might be wise to use Ubuntu, simply because with the Ubuntu server build, you don't even get a GUI. So if you do that, you're not having to waste precious memory resources rendering the Windows GUI. That's why I ended up using Ubuntu to build mine. And there's a website that contains the Jamf Pro server, what's currently supported, the builds. So I alluded at the beginning of the session that I wrote up a nice little exercise on how to build yourself a nice model cluster. I put the same link again. The goal of this exercise, you'll end up creating a combination of the DMZ config I talked about earlier and just a simple load balance config. And when you go to that URL, you'll get a little PDF file that tells you how to build a 5-member cluster with one database, a DMZ, 2 client-facing servers, and a balancer. One of the other benefits of using Ubuntu is I found a free load balancer called Pound. That's what they have you use in CJA class. You can configure it with minimal effort. And in my exercise URL, I found a guy that literally documented how to use Pound with your JSS. Thank you, John Kitzmiller. I didn't have to write 2 extra pages of documentation for that. Here's kind of a start of what it looks like. I'm not going to run through it all, but you get a pretty good idea of what you're trying to do within Parallels. You're trying to build 5 different servers. You have them all fired up at once, and you're going to build yourself a cluster on that hard drive, on your individual hard drive. I've got a model of what it kind of, or a video here of what it kind of looks like all finished. How do I start that? I'm feeling like a dork here. There we go. So First thing I'm going to do is, one of the servers I built was clients 201. We're going to go in, we're just going to create a nice little policy on it. You'll see here I'm going to create a policy, just simple one, software update policy. And sadly, I'm really slow at typing. They told me I wouldn't be able to give a live demo just a couple hours ago, so I had to do a really quick screencast. But the goal of this video is you're going to see that when I connect to another member of my cluster, the same policies are there. Doesn't matter what server I'm connected to. I probably won't need to run through all 4 of those. I'll spare you all of that. But let's at least get through a second one here. So you see that the same software update policy I wrote is present in both servers without me having to do anything. Yep. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and spare you all of watching the rest of that clip just because, like I said, that kind of happened at the last minute. They told me I wasn't going to be able to do that. But okay, so hey, I've got a model cluster built. I've whiteboarded it, got a really good plan. So what am I going to need to do to migrate my single server JSS to this great cluster that I've built? First of all, you probably should have a really good backup of the old server. You should probably have a really detailed rollback plan. So I was really nervous that this wasn't going to work. So I literally wrote up a whole plan how we're going to move forward or how we're going to move back, whatever happens. I don't know about you, but I kind of like to be chummy with my network admins and my VMware administrator and load balancer admins. I get a lot more done that way if I have a less adversarial relationship with them. And one thing I hadn't thought about till right before we were getting ready to do it, if I'm going to do split DNS and whatnot, and I want to minimize my downtime, I should probably be able to have phone access to my ISP, have them change the DNS, and get it pushed out there as rapidly as possible. One other point of note, so I would not try to build a cluster or migrate to one even if you had a plan right in the middle of standardized testing. A fall break or a spring break is probably a better choice for that. And another point of note, and I did not do this, but my Jamf buddy warned me of people that did. They'll say, great, I've got this cluster I've been working hard on. I learned in class and whatnot. All of a sudden, my Jamf buddy's having to troubleshoot something that went wrong because nobody bothered to call them and let them know. And yeah, they'll do it, but you're going to make your relationship with them a lot better if you don't do that and you let them know what's going on ahead of time. This is how detailed I got with my team on how we were going to do the migration. I actually kind of wrote us a group script of, hey, who's going to do what and whatnot. We actually followed this. This kind of went off almost without a hitch, other than one thing I'm going to cover here in a minute. It was a gotcha we ran into. So one of the things you're going to have to do when you do get a load balancer involved, even like the pound that I used in this exercise, our district's not using pound. We already had paid for a commercial load balancer for our Power School servers. So I ended up being told, here's what you're going to use. And I'm like, okay. One of the things a load balancer can do is if one of your Tomcat servers is down, it can programmatically determine and not forward traffic to the down server. So I took advantage of a feature Jamf added within the last couple of years, the health check page. I went and told the load balancer here's the health check page. If you can't find this, then consider the server down. But if you can find it, consider the server up. Like I said earlier, you want to let your clients finish a full session with the same server. I've heard tale of folks trying to do a poor man's load balancer with round-robin DNS, and If you were to do round-robin DNS instead of using a true load balancer, you're going to find that your session may not stay with the same server, and your second server and your first server, or even your third server, they have about a 30 to 60 second lag time in terms of their synchronization. So if you don't complete the full session on the same back end, you're going to run into problems. So that's typically a session that, or typically a setting that you're going to find on your load balancer. Oh, and the last one, test all Jamf Pro features. I'm not trying to sound like, I'm certain everybody knows to test, but what's funny is I got my cluster all migrated. I thought everything was working, had it all ready to go, and the next day I got complaints from roughly about a third of my district saying self-service isn't working. And I'm like, well, why are a third of them complaining and the others aren't? It turns out one of my Tomcat backends, I did not get Tomcat totally installed properly, and I didn't catch that, and I wouldn't have caught that because it was missing some files in the installer. I mean, I'm guessing no one here can go through and say, okay, for Tomcat, when it's installed, every one of these files is going to be present. I doubt that. So make sure you test a policy. Make sure you test adding a machine to DEP pre-stage. Make sure you test adding an app. Test everything you can with it before or while you're on that lower stress time. And my backup admin, he is one of those people that he always is deeply concerned about he's like, great, how are you backing it up? So, okay, well, immediately once we had the server working, I worked with him. We found a good solution that, we back up the database with the jar file like you folks probably are doing. And he also does VMware snapshots for me on a frequent basis, both at upgrade time and I don't totally know when his logic is, but he has set up some random times to grab that. So security considerations. Okay. I know I went through those diagram slides fairly quick. I don't want to run out of time, but one of the things you may have caught on them, and that's, like I said, that's why I made the slides available for download. You're going to have, all JSS servers these days happen to have a cert on them, a wildcard cert. So one thing I did was I used a wildcard cert and copied the key store from server to server in my cluster. Sounds pretty good, but I've also heard a lot of IS people say, hey, no, I don't want the same cert on each and every server because what if one's compromised? My chances of a 2048-bit encryption key is probably not going to be compromised, but that being said, I can't say whether that's going to be the case. So who knows? Maybe the answer is I should have put individual certs on there. I can do that the next time we're renewing our certs. So, okay, great. You build an admin console like one of those slides, and hey, you've solved your problem of not being able to get in a crisis. What happens when one of your engineers is dealing with the special education cooperative off campus and he's not there to get to the admin console and he's never been approved for VPN access for your district? I had to make sure that all of a sudden, hey, I went to the CTO and got him, I had to get him VPN access into the district. Some may not want everybody who it is. For instance, we give our principals access to delegate punishments to iOS devices, but I really don't want them messing around with the JSS at home. So, hey, in some cases, I have to decide, or I have to work with our team to decide who gets what level of access. And one other thing you'll learn in class, and this is one that we kind of thought over a few times. So you can have your load balancer terminate the SSL traffic on the load balancer. In other words, your connection from the client to the balancer will be over 8443, but your connection between the load balancer and Tomcat may take place over an unsecure port just to speed things up. I don't know if that's really a smart move or not, too. They'll teach you that technique in class, but maybe your security team doesn't feel strongly or feel very good about that. And then there's the last one. So the JSS offers really good checkbox selection and settings for limiting your Tomcat servers. You can have some of them make it so if somebody were to hit that URL, it just says server disabled or web access disabled. Or, maybe you don't want to leave the API on all the client-facing servers. Maybe you just want that API on your admin console, because you're really the only one writing scripts on the API. I mean, your users aren't going to do that, so perhaps you go in and turn that off for the client console. And so client enrollment also, do I really want people enrolling brand new iOS devices off the campus? The answer might be yes to that, but I don't know. Everyone has to come to those answers themselves. I got a little bit of practical advice too. So with standardized testing, I don't leave anything to chance anymore. I got burnt bad. We consider every time we go into testing whether, hey, do I need to add another Tomcat server? Or, hey, maybe I've got too many and we're sitting there wasting server resources. Maybe you go back and look at your scaling plan and decide, do you want to add a server, take away one? I don't know. One of the things I've watched people, and I've taken the CJA class now twice. It's not really because I didn't pass. We had a training pass that was about to expire, and I wanted to just make sure I was really good on that topic since it's kind of turned into one of my passions. I've watched people in the class struggle with how to keep their host names, their IP addresses, and their passwords all organized, because every one of those servers will have a different DNS name, even though your whole cluster, the load balancer itself, will have the host name of your JSS URL, but all the individual servers will have their own IP addresses and host names. Find something that works for you to keep all that organized. I've sat and watched people in class struggle for half an hour, 45 minutes trying to remember what they wrote down just to keep that organized. And if they're doing that for a test exercise or a class, imagine, okay, hey, I've got this deployed and I don't know the password to my admin console. Or, hey, I don't know what the URL is. Well, then you're going to feel really silly. So after that, I had a pretty well implemented cluster, and immediately my techs were confused, though, about something. They didn't know when like enrolling devices or when going to the browser to go in and control the JSS, they weren't sure when to use what URL. So if you are going to restrict access to the admin console to the designated admin console server, make sure your techs know when to use the JSS URL or the admin console's URL. And one last note to part on, and that is, okay, so Jamf comes out with updates all the time. Dean announced yesterday, or I don't know if it was Dean or it was one of them, announced yesterday that the updates and upgrades for the JSS are going to come a lot more frequently now. So with the cluster and doing it with a manual installer, I'm noticing, because I'm doing it on Windows, even though Linux is my preference, I went ahead and did it on Windows because most of our data center is Windows-based. I don't have a really good upgrade strategy other than, hey, I'm going to back up these files. Hey, I'm going to move this, and I'm going to put everything back and restart services and whatnot. It takes me about half an hour, 40 minutes to upgrade a server version, and that's kind of no good if you want to do that on after hours time. Typically, server upgrades don't happen till after hours time. I don't know about you, but I like to sleep at night. That's really it for the formal slides. I'm going to be honest, I was not that eloquent of a speaker here, but I love taking questions on the topic, so I'm hoping to have a lot of them.
We're just getting ready to implement Jamf. And at what point is clustering necessary client number-wise?
At what point is clustering necessary as opposed to doing a single server? Is that what I heard?
Correct.
Okay. There really is no magic point. So, up until our standardized testing in 2015, I would say at that time we had roughly about 3,000 clients, and things all seemed to be working, but then I threw a stressful event at our ecosystem and things went down. So there really is no magic answer, but I've heard some people talk about the number 1,000. That's actually kind of a number I've kind of kept in the back of my head. Our Apple admin told me that if you're going to have 1,000 devices in the district, you would want at that point to add another caching server. Well, if I'm adding another caching server, maybe that's the point I think about adding another Tomcat node or whatnot. Just various things that kind of trigger that. I don't have a magic silver bullet number because, like I said, I mean, we had 3,000 devices and everything was working up until standardized testing. My gut is about every 1,000 devices we add, and we're getting toward the end of that because all of our grades now have been saturated on one-to-one. I'm going to reevaluate in our environment every time we add about anywhere from right around 1,000 devices personally.
Okay, thank you.
One question about Cisco ICE. We're implementing that too. Would you say that going from a single server configuration, would that warrant going into clustering?
It might. So like I said, in the presentation earlier, I found when that crash occurred that most of the resource utilization we were using was responding to Cisco ICE queries. I mean, I went through the JSS logs quite a few times and I'm seeing responding to this, it was totally filling my logs doing that. So if it's totally filling my logs, and what I wanted to do was get its own little thing, I don't care if it overwhelms that one server. Maybe I give that one a little bit more access or a little bit more
Why wouldn't you go through the load balancer also to provide higher availability?
Well, I could do that. So, okay, so if I go to do that, I was actually talking with the guy on the phone when I discussed that idea with my Jamf buddy. And the main reason for that is, okay, I'm going to take 1/3 of my resources and dedicate those to Cisco ISE. That may mean I've got to add 6 servers instead of 5, where if I designate just one to go to it. I will also disclose with the Cisco ISE, while that did work for us, we are no longer using the Cisco ISE implementation simply because of cost factors. Cisco has begun to start charging extra for the MDM integration module, and it got priced out of what we could afford. Unfortunately, we are having to make the move back to MAC addresses at this time.
Gotcha. Yeah, it just seems like it could be a potential choke point for us.
And it could well be. I mean, every cluster is going to be different. I can tell you a school district like mine with that many machines, our needs may be different than, say, Fletcher Previns at IBM. I'm certain, I don't know how they're hosting theirs, but their deployment's smaller than mine as well. For those, you know, maybe that database and Tomcat separation is all you would need to do it. Maybe you just throw more RAM and you have Tomcat utilize the memory you throw at it better.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Are you using anything like Zabbix or JConsole to monitor the resources? I mean,
no, actually. So our Windows and our Windows admins and our VMware admins tend to be who monitors that for me, and I think they're just using the resource monitors available to VMware.
okay.
And whatnot, and the resources available within Windows to monitor that.
Because to kind of go off of his question about the need to cluster, I have a very large clustered environment and have dealt with scaling.
You've probably dealt with a lot crazier than I have, sir.
And it boils down to the number of threads, connections, and all those things, and monitoring that is key to understanding when to start looking at scaling, when to start looking, because I've done horizontal scaling and vertical scaling. And it just depends on those resources. I think, and I've not used Zabbix before, and that's why I was wondering if maybe you had. They talked about it in another session, so.
I've not, quite honestly, but that being said, so I didn't get our cluster implemented until a few months. It took me a few months after having taken that initial CJA class just to get it off the ground, because I wanted to do it at a time that wasn't crazy for people. I am still learning a lot on a day-to-day basis on how to do it, but that being said, I think I've come kind of a long way from the days of running a single server. I mean, I've been working on Apple stuff since OS 9 and really had never had clustering experience at all.
Yep. Good deal. All right.
Great presentation, Brian. Thanks for that.
Thank
and
you.
It looks like you've had a lot of fun with it, which leads me into my question.
Sure.
Has anyone from Jamf or yourself ever considered putting your stuff in the Jamf cloud and foregoing the need to deal with all of that?
Well, okay, so Jamf Cloud, that is actually a really good one. I actually consulted with them last year at JNUC. That was one of the things after that test failure. I'm like, you know, maybe I turn this over to people who know what they're doing. Pricing wise, I think, I mean, they're usually pretty generous on the pricing, but I was kind of at one point told that the URL would have to change, and re-enrolling my clients, one of the great things about moving to this cluster is I didn't have to change my JSS URL at all, because I just gave that to the load balancer.
That's right.
And I didn't want to face having to re-enroll all the Mac clients or whatnot. Maybe since then they have the ability to use a custom URL, and that would be in contention for us, because I mean, I'm already using Azure as my distribution point. I know Jamf's trying to push their Jamf Cloud distribution point. Maybe they've now got the ability to use a URL that's not jamfcloud.com.
Okay. Yeah, sure. It sounds like you've got everything under control to run it yourself now anyway, so.
Well, I do, but like I said, even I've got some Achilles heels with it, simply because like my upgrade process is really slow. I'm used to scripting Linux, not Windows. I have to go in and do a whole bunch of moving things around.
Yep, thanks.
Perhaps a cloud might be more appropriate.
Yeah, hi, I'm Mark Golola. I'm responsible for the cloud operations at Jamf, and so that issue is still an open problem for us. You'll have to re-enroll the devices, but it's on our backlog of items to address. So hopefully in the coming year we'll have that one nailed.
I'm hoping so. I'm honestly hoping that one day I can just, much like we have turned over a lot of our email and Office 365 functions to Microsoft, you know, hopefully one day I can turn over hosting my JSS to you guys and butt out of it, let the people who know what they're doing do it. That's my hope. Very true. I like to tinker. I like to play with that and parallels and whatnot, but I have a really warped sense of fun. I'm the dad of 4-year-olds. I must have a warped sense of fun somewhere. Any more questions? Well, it was nice being here. If anybody likes, I've got all the links that I kind of use for the source of that. If you folks would like me to put the links to the keynote session and the exercise back up, I think I can do that.